I'm Jerry Sanders, President and CEO of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. Today's program focuses on something you've probably seen in the news recently and may have even experienced yourself: organized retail crime. On behalf of the Chamber and the business community, I'd like to thank you for participating in this important discussion. We've partnered with experts at the local and national level who will share how retail theft is impacting business and what's being done to address it. I'd like to thank our friends at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office and the U.S. Chamber for helping us bring this program together. Organized retail crime has risen to a national crisis, impacting both large retailers and small businesses alike, and traumatizing store employees and shoppers. To steal these goods, groups often use violent, aggressive tactics, which leave a traumatic impact on the mental and emotional health of employees, store owners, and customers. I had a background in policing a long time ago, and shoplifting was something that was more of a minor nuisance. We taught the store security people how to take the reports, and then we'd come and pick up the suspects. But things have really surpassed that, and now it's turned into something that is really a difficult and life-challenging experience. Addressing the problem of organized retail crime requires a coordinated, all-hands-on-deck effort, leveraging resources at the federal, state, and local levels. This crime is being perpetrated by large, sophisticated criminal rings who hoard and warehouse stolen goods, passing them off as legitimate merchandise and selling them online. We believe that bringing business leaders and local officials together to dialogue and share positive policy solutions like we're doing here today will help curb this rising problem. Today, we're joined by our partners, San Diego District Attorney Summer Stephan, U.S. Chamber Executive Vice President Neil Bradley, along with Danielle Lee, who works in retail and has been a victim of these crimes and will share her story with us. I'll introduce each of our panelists, and they'll give us their insights on how retail crime is impacting business, workers, customers, and neighborhoods, and what's being done about it. Then we'll open up the floor to allow you to ask specific questions that you've been thinking about or may come up during the discussion. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box. This is an important topic that's affecting many of our businesses, so we're honored to create this panel to share what we know and hopefully answer the questions that you have. As your moderator, I'll be guiding us through this process, and because we only have about an hour, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to start with Danielle. Danielle Lee is an organized retail crime investigator for a chain of retailers in Southern California and serves as a board member on the San Diego Organized Retail Crime Alliance. She's been employed in varying levels of retail and loss prevention management for the last 20 years and has seen firsthand how the crime trends have evolved, including their impact on business, the employees, and the customers who witness them. Danielle, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored that I was invited to speak today and hope to give you a glimpse into the everyday life of someone in my industry. It's interesting, prior to this conversation today, I was thinking about what to tell you all, and I realized that the everyday life that I'm so used to dealing with has really desensitized me a bit. I've experienced so many crazy things working in retail that I never expected to encounter. But now I think of theft as job security, because unfortunately theft, specifically organized crime, is always going to be a part of retail life. The question is how we're going to be reactive, or are we going to be reactive, or are we going to be proactively fighting this fight together? Before I get into some personal experiences that I've had, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between general shoplifting and the more organized groups that are impacting us as consumers now. The easiest way to explain the difference is shoplifting can be for personal use, crimes of property, crimes of necessity, those types of things. But when it comes to organized retail crime, or ORC, this involves a group of multiple people taking multiple items for resale, and it's definitely not for personal use. They impact multiple retailers, multiple counties, and they're making a huge profit off the losses of retailers, including mine. ORC would include the gangs and groups seen in all the smash and grabs and violent shoplifts in the news the last year. I'll also give you just a short history lesson on ORC in California. Thanks to Proposition 47 being passed by voters in 2014, this ramped up ORC into high gear. In my opinion, this proposition was misunderstood by a lot of the citizens who voted for it and has directly attributed to a significant increase in theft since felony level thresholds were moved up to $950 under this law. What this did was educate the criminals and give them empowerment to steal up to $949 with the risk of being caught, dropped to a cite and release. We even have criminals that will shop using a calculator on their phone to tally up their haul before they walk out the door. Luckily, in San Diego County, we have some great partners in law enforcement and the DA's office helping us on the prosecution side to work around some of these roadblocks. But either way, there's only so much we can do to proactively fight this battle alone. In order to enact change, this will truly need to be a group effort. The biggest change in the evolution of ORC since I've been in the industry is the increasing violence that has occurred. Really, at this point, ORC is more of a public safety issue, not just a theft issue anymore. When Prop 47 went into effect, I was working for a company with hands-on loss prevention policies, which meant that I would witness the crime, approach the suspect when they exited the store, physically restrain them, and walk them back to my office to wait for law enforcement. Yes, I'm only 5'2", and at the time I was the youngest person and the only female on my team, but don't worry, I still handled business. I just had to leave out some of those details when my family asked how work was going. When the word got out about the $950 felony level and theft immediately increased, I was apprehending people that I would have found in possession of guns, knives, pepper spray, and tasers once we were back in the office. Most companies are hands off now, and for good reason after seeing some of the things I've seen over the years. I'll tell you about one personal experience that I recently had back in December of 2021. I was invited to speak that day about retail theft victims on a Zoom call with business owners, law enforcement, and the DA's office. That day I spoke about the trauma that occurs when employees and customers witness violent ORC. That same night, I was actually working in a store where there was a shoplift in progress that quickly escalated to a potential active shooter situation. A customer reported the suspect that we were watching had a gun. I began clearing customers out of the area while I was on the phone with 911 dispatch, and the suspect saw that I was on the phone and walked right up to me with dispatch on the phone, able to hear our conversation, and said to clear the kids out of the store because he was going to take me out. He asked me if I was afraid of dying and said he was going to make me see God today. PD arrived on scene, took him into custody without incident, where they recovered a later we found out fake gun. But even with all of that chaos, the suspect was cited, released, and he was back inside the store 25 minutes later, again, threatening my employees, threatening the customers. And at that point, he was arrested for a second time. Later that same evening, I was a witness to a shoplift apprehension and was standing near the loss prevention detective as he approached a female outside the store. At that point, the suspect turned around and punched me right in the face, almost knocking me out cold. We did recover the stolen merchandise, but she was able to flee on foot before PD arrived. Up until then, I thought I was pretty tough. But that night when I got in my car, I did have a little breakdown. No one should have to endure this kind of chaos just working in retail. Someone has to do it though, and I love my job. But that day, the same day that I spoke about retail victims, really put some things in perspective for me. I have a law enforcement friend that when I asked if he had a good day, he always responds that every day he makes it home is a good day. I started reminding myself to think the same way. The difference is law enforcement is fighting the ORC fight with a bulletproof vest, a badge, and a gun, while retailers, employees, and customers are exposed to and traumatized by these incidents, many without the physical or emotional tools to be able to handle them effectively. These are just a few of the reasons why ORC laws and penalties need to change and why I'm so honored to be a small part of enacting that change. And with that, I will turn it over to my crime fighting friends from the DA's office. Thank you again so much for your time today, and be safe out there.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We appreciate you sharing your stories with us, and I know that those thoroughly imprint themselves on your mind. I'd like to introduce San Diego District Attorney Summer Stephan now. Summer has devoted her life to protecting children and families, providing justice to the most vulnerable, and is a national leader in the fight against human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Summer focuses on advancing public safety through fair and equal justice, bringing solutions to complex issues with a unique data-driven common sense approach that works to address the root causes of certain crimes driven by mental illness and addiction. As district attorney, she leads the second largest DA's office in California managing a professional staff of 1,000 and serving as the People's Prosecutor for San Diego County and its more than 3 million residents. She also serves as the Vice President of the National District Attorneys Association. Thank you, Summer, for joining us today, and to you and your team for partnering with us on this program.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And it's so appropriate that you are leading this discussion with your background as the mayor of one of the biggest cities and also the police chief of the San Diego Police Department, and now in your role as the regional chamber, and bringing us together with the U.S. Chamber. And then hearing Danielle's voice, I think is so impactful. What Danielle said, it's through the eyes of the people on the ground that we must see these issues in order to solve them. I'm Summer Stephan, San Diego County's district attorney. I've spent 32 years in serving as the people's prosecutor, rising through the ranks to become the DA. And the key is the feeling that drives our mission is the understanding that without safety, nothing thrives. And while before we might have thought about safety as being limited to certain blocks, certain sectors where we have more public safety impacts, what we've seen now through all of the images across the nation is the fact that this terror of feeling like the rug has been pulled out from under you that we see in the images of the smash and grabs that are the organized retail theft are having a very deep impact. They're not just impacting the people, the business owners, impacting their pocketbook in just tremendous ways. And I know that Neil, in his role of the U.S. Chamber, will address some of those issues, but also impacting your employees that, as Danielle described, they are going to work, they want to get home, they want to feed their family, they think they're not in a dangerous profession, but it has turned dangerous. In the same vein, it affects customers and it affects the overall community feeling about safety. I visit with, on average, 600 different community groups on a yearly basis. And one of the number one things that I hear about is this issue in the last couple of years of organized retail theft. I've had meetings with business owners from small to large with literally tears in their eyes, feeling hopelessness and helplessness over the resulting damage and chaos that they are experiencing. So I want to step back from it and really kind of break it down for a few moments here. And I think Danielle began to describe what we're talking about. What we're really seeing now is not this loose, one-off theft, but it really, when we say organized retail theft, it means something. It means more organization, means more profit, it means more of it, and it means more damage to our community. It is organized, and what we need to do as a nation and a region is to bring that sophisticated, organized way that law enforcement and the retail and business community can deal with it. We need a shift in the way that we look at it, and we need to stop listening to these really just voices that do not understand the issue, that really their solution is to say, well, retailers should have more security. That is not how it works. Law enforcement is supposed to take care of business, but we need the tools to do it. We need the laws to be able to bring the rule of law, to bring accountability, to bring justice, but our hands are being tied behind our back constantly. The thieves and the organized crimes have have basically graduated to another level, but the tools that were given to fight it have not graduated. So what has happened in most every state, including California, is the change in the laws, which the people who want to perpetrate harm know about it and use it to their full advantage. So people who steal under $950, they're not just stealing a few things to put food on the table, which of course needs accountability, but at a different level. But we need to make sure they have food. But this is a business. It is it's really a gang. We call it a crew. They go in, they're stealing. They're not stealing just anything in sight. They have a shopping list. It's a shopping list of what a consumer is gonna buy. They go in, they steal in accordance with the orders of their higher up in their organized crime ring. They steal the specific item, whether it is lingerie, if it's around Valentine's Day, whether it's perfume on Mother's Day, whether it's the luxury designer clothing that specifically is going to then be sold to a fence who's going to sell it online as if it is legitimate property. And consumers are buying it at a lower price, lining the pockets of this organized crime ring, who's then hiring more people to commit more crimes. So the laws have to shift and change, and they have to account for this organization. Beginning in 2019, we saw that the laws began to shift a little bit in our favor, but it is still a very high bar for us to be overcome. And it's if 2 or more people are organized and they come through to commit an organized theft, and we're able to catch them doing it, and we can prove that they're doing it not just to put the stuff in their own homes, but to resell it online or return it for money. Again, more and more requirements of proof, not just that you came in with 3 people, smashed everything, stole a whole bunch of stuff, but all of these proof points, then we can go for an actual organized crime prosecution. Since 2019, we've done that in 99 cases. We've convicted 68 people. How did we do it? It's with really coming together and investing, listening to our community. We have something called ORCA, which is part of the organization, the Organized Crime Retail. But in San Diego, we have our own brand where our police departments, sheriff, police, and a big part with the CHP, who's working very hard on this. And listening to the community, I was able to assign a special prosecutor, Anna Wynn, and a team of investigators to pull these cases together, to put them together. You're really essentially doing like a federal RICO case on a theft, and you need the resources to do it without additional resources coming into DAs or your ground law enforcement to do it. But we're still doing it. An example of a case that we did was $700,000 worth of loss. When we look at one case that we prosecuted that's so close to two-thirds of $1 million, you look at the figures nationally of a $30 billion economic loss to retailers, and you believe that figure. And you believe that that figure makes sense when one case is close to $1 million. That's what we caught them for. We were able, with this case, to put together, because they're usually dressed, they're covering up their through their attire, they have their license plates often blocked, but through ORCA, we're able to put all of the images together, put the whole serial of the crime together to get a big picture to be able to begin our search warrants to attack this crime. This is just one example, and it shows you the magnitude of the problem. So the voices, and I looked at the list, amazing people online. Your voice has power. We need better legislation to hold accountable the people that are selling and profiting online. We need better accountability. We need better laws, and we need better funding in order to protect and serve, because this stuff, prosecuting it, takes so much of our efforts and resources, and we want to do it. We care, but we also are fighting all sorts of other crime. But it is a way to prevent harm by making sure that we invest in our laws, in our law enforcement to attack this issue. But I want to tell our community also something else I've heard. People are feeling like they want to give up. Business owners are sometimes not even calling police anymore. And that's because during COVID, it exacerbated the problem because most regions had zero bail for nonviolent crime because our jails could not hold capacity because of COVID, except for our murders and rapes, essentially. But we don't want you to give up because things are changing. We are managing, we are in a better, healthier state. So we need you to call police, and we need you to ask us to continue to do our job and to trust that we want to do it. And we want you to fight alongside us to bring the better tools and better laws to help us keep the community safe. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Summer. We really appreciate your comments. Our next speaker serves as the Executive Vice President, Chief Policy Officer, and Head of Strategic Advocacy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Neil Bradley is responsible for the organization's overall advocacy efforts. In addition to managing policy development for the Chamber, Bradley oversees its government affairs activities, political program, and relations with other business organizations. At the U.S. Chamber, Bradley has led the national discussion on hundreds of high-profile policy issues influencing legislation at the federal, state, and local levels. He regularly appears on broadcast and cable news networks to present the business community's priorities. Thank you for partnering with us, Neil.
Well, Jerry, it's great to see you again and great to be with you. Let me start with just a few statistical facts. And let's start with small retailers. Last year, 54% of small businesses reported increased incidents of shoplifting in their stores and facilities. We hear anecdotally of really tragic stories of small businesses, family-run businesses that have been built, in some instances, over generations, but that have become victims of a constant and reoccurring criminal theft rings that have forced the businesses to close. When you go to larger retailers, they may not be facing closure, but the losses have hit historic levels. Over the last 5 years, the amount of goods lost to organized retail theft has increased by 50% for our nation's largest retailers. For every $1 billion in sales, about $700,000 is now lost to organized retail theft. We see this across the country. No jurisdiction seems immune to it. And it's one of the reasons that at the U.S. Chamber, we think that we need a comprehensive solution that brings together federal policy, state policy, and local policy. And particularly, we've called for 3 specific actions. Let me start at the federal level. Summer was mentioning how these organized retail theft rings, how they unload the goods that they've stolen through online retailers and platforms. Before the internet, if someone was stealing a good that they hope to resell, one of the venues that they would use is the pawn shop. And we responded as a society by imposing requirements on pawn shops that effectively required them to know certain things about the people who were coming in trying to sell a good, to collect certain information so that we could cut off pawn shops as a venue for offloading stolen items. Well, the modern version of that is online platforms today, and the ability of an organized retail theft ring, or crew as some are called it, to come together and use anonymity to sell through these online platforms. And so there's a piece of legislation pending in Congress right now that the US Chamber and other leading business organizations have endorsed called the Inform Act. And it literally does for online platforms what we used to do for pawn shops. It requires platform operators to collect certain basic information about the people who are trying to sell high volumes of goods on their platform. It's kind of the know your seller rule, so that we can cut off e-commerce platforms as a venue for these retail crime rings to offload the goods that they've stolen. It's bipartisan. We've made some progress. We've gotten it through the Senate, and we're working very hard to get it to the president's desk this year as a means of tackling this problem. But there's also work to be done at the state level. Both Summer and Danielle mentioned the changes in the thresholds for what constitutes a misdemeanor versus a felony in terms of theft. Over the last 2 decades, 40 states have increased that threshold, often initially for very good reasons, adjusting it because it hadn't been adjusted for decades to reflect inflation. Unfortunately, what's happened is that these organized retail theft rings have figured out how to take advantage of those increased thresholds. As Danielle reported, and we hear the same things from our members, we literally have thieves going in with calculators, calculating how much they're stealing so they can come in under that threshold and avoid accountability. That's why we're pushing state legislatures to enact laws that do 2 things: that recognize organized retail theft as a separate crime and provide enhanced penalties so that we can bring these criminals to justice. And the second is to have aggregation so that if someone's walking in and stealing $949 in the morning and they show back up in the afternoon to steal another $949, then we aggregate those things together so that we can provide the maximum penalties and ensure that people aren't exploiting these increased thresholds to avoid accountability. Some good news on that front: we see both red and blue states taking action. In the last 2 months, Florida, Republican dominated state, Republican controlled state, Illinois, a Democrat controlled state, have both acted in their legislatures to take these very steps to help local prosecutors go after these organized retail crime rings. And then the third point is the local level. I wish I could report to you that every jurisdiction had prosecutors like Summer who are committed to making sure that that they're using the maximum tools that they have to prosecute these crimes. But that's not always the case. And so we need to focus to make sure that we have local district attorneys who are committed and have the resources and tools to go after these offenders. And so if we can get those 3 things right, if we can get local prosecutors with the right tools and power to go after them, if we can get state laws changed so that we can provide enhanced penalties, eliminate loopholes, and if we can make changes at the federal level to cut off the venues that these crime syndicates are using to offload these goods, I think we can reverse this tide that we're talking about. And perhaps the best thing about that will be avoiding the violence and the confrontations that Danielle started with, which at the end of the day is frankly a lot more devastating than even the total dollar amounts of what's occurring.
Neil, thank you very much. And thank you to the US Chamber for helping to organize this important discussion, but also on advancing some legislation that should work. Let's get started with questions now. We've got a couple that were submitted during registration, and we'll start with those. Our first question may be a nice recap of what we discussed today. How can we work together to push for common sense solutions for our business community? And I'll let our district attorney answer that one first.
We need you. We need your voices. It's really important. We are your public servants, law enforcement, your legislatures on both the state and the federal level. Your voice is very important, so you need to make it known. And the other thing is that you want to make sure that you look at your operation and bring in a little bit of an expertise. It can be contacting our Orca Alliance. There's so many experts there, like Danielle, like law enforcement, that will be happy to visit with you and give you an idea about what it is that we need as proof in order to bring accountability and go forward. Whether it might be an inexpensive video system that doesn't erase right away, that keeps some of those images. It's a small investment that we need to look at, that maybe we can look at grants if you're a small business to invest in, like we do sometimes with cameras or lights in parks, in order to capture that evidence, because we still have to prove these cases beyond a reasonable doubt. I can tell you that being able to make a case by capturing the video evidence, capturing everything that you have. We don't want you to put yourself in harm's way, but we want to be able to have the information makes a difference. San Diego is not foolproof, but certainly after we prosecuted about 5 cases in a row and got convictions, the word does get out. I mean, criminals know what region is going to be friendly to them and what region isn't. So it means that your voice, your trust, your giving us the evidence, cooperating with law enforcement is going to make a difference. But your voice also with the state legislature. For example, part of the thing that happened in the repassing of our Organized Retail Theft Act in California missed a piece. It did not reauthorize the ability for one DA's office to take a ring or a crew and prosecute them for their series across the state. So we used to in San Diego, because we put so much effort into this, to take a case and bring all of the cases from Southern California, prosecute the same ring, bring better accountability. Now we're able to do that, but it's a much harder stretch. Ask for the aggregate law. We do not have the aggregation law in the state of California. We need that aggregation, because what does it matter to the store if you go in and steal 3 times a day and it's over $950 versus 1 time a day? In fact, it's more strain on your business if it's done over 3 different times. We need that common sense approach, and the power of your voice needs to be there. And the same on the federal laws and the federal level. But this partnership, I mean, Jerry is, the king of community policing, and we still believe that's the strength of any community, is the partnership with the community, bringing a unified voice to make common sense changes that make our communities safer.
Thank you very much, Summer. Danielle, do you have anything to add from a business perspective?
I think on the business side, we just need to continue the communication and partnership with each other, because so many of these offenders are jumping from retailer to retailer, and we're each fighting that fight alone. So the great thing about the Orca groups in general, but specifically the SD Orca group, is that we come together, we share our photos, and we'll be able to help identify criminals for each other and really prosecute them for a series involving not only multiple times, but the multiple retailers involved. And just a shout out to the San Diego DA's office. We always hope that our people who are jumping from county to county at least hit one store down in San Diego, so then our friend Anna Wynn can take them. Because we know that once people cross over that San Diego County line, business will be handled. So really, it's just a commitment from retailer to retailer. We need to make sure we're still working together, reporting everything, like Summer said, because yes, a lot does go unreported. And once we do our side, then we'll entrust, that the prosecution will handle the rest. And thank you guys so much.
Neil, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, one, I just agree with everything that's been said. And I guess the only thing I would add is, I think we need a sense of urgency about this. One of the most disturbing things that I heard the summer report just a moment ago is about stores who just have given up, who don't want to take the time and effort because they don't think that the issue of the theft is going to be resolved. Once we enter that type of environment, once that occurs, it's really hard to recover from. It's really hard to restore that trust and that kind of civic fabric. And so, I think there's a lack of a sense of urgency on some policymakers at both the state and federal level to help get this under control.
I agree with you, and there's maybe some things we can help on that. Neil, the next question is for you. Combating retail theft is usually a priority of local law enforcement, as well as policymakers from city, county, and even sometimes state levels. However, this is an issue that historically has not gathered as much federal level attention. What were the deciding factors that ultimately convinced the U.S. Chamber to engage on this issue and urge policymakers in Washington to start acting?
Yeah, I think part of it is that we saw the need for urgency, and we saw how widespread organized retail crime had become. I think the other difference is, I talked a little bit about the pawn shop versus the e-commerce retail platform. The only effective entity that can kind of regulate internet and e-commerce platforms is the federal government, is Congress. And so if we were in a non-internet age and these organized retail crime rings were still trying to offload stuff through pawn shops or black market swap meets or whatever, then there probably wouldn't be much of a role for the federal government. But they're using e-commerce. They're using the fact that this is a platform that's regulated at the federal level. And so we need federal policymakers to respond so that we can empower local officials and local district attorneys who want to do the right thing to be able to shut this down.
Thank you, Neil. I think you guys have answered the next question I had, so I'm not going to ask that. What I am going to do is turn this over to Cameron Celeste, Assistant Director of Business and Community Relations at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, to help facilitate the Q&A or those questions submitted during our discussion today. Cameron, thank you very much for helping out. What's our first question?
Thank you, Jerry. We appreciate you having us here today. So there are several questions in the Q&A chat box. We might not be able to get through all of them, but we will certainly ask as many as we can. So our first question is for Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, can you please repeat the stats at the beginning of your presentation regarding the impacts of organized retail crime nationally?
Sure. A survey of small business owners, 54% reported an increase in shoplifting in their stores and facilities in 2021 compared to the prior year. For larger retailers, where we actually have more data and more measurement on the value of goods lost, the current evaluation, the current numbers, for every $1 billion in sales, about $700,000 is lost to theft. It's about a 50% increase over the last 5 years. So, we used to be 350,000 in items, dollars worth of items stolen for every $1 billion in sales, and now we're almost twice that.
Thank you, Neil. Our next question here is, has there been any consideration, this is for the group, has there been any consideration given to educate the public that they are buying stolen products when they buy new items online? Maybe something like a public service announcement to tell consumers they are funding criminal organizations and that they're not just getting a good deal?
It's a little bit difficult to do that. I mean, education is really important. The problem is that the fences that are selling this stuff online, it isn't being necessarily sold dramatically at a lower price, like this, in such that a consumer is gonna know right away, like, this has got to be stolen. They're able to sell it at a lesser price But this is why there's such high profit, because they can still sell it at a pretty decent price that may not fully alert the consumer that this is too good to be true. So the real answer is really turning to what Neil was saying, that it's about treating online crime the same way as we deal with brick and mortar. We did the same thing when we had price gouging. The law of price gouging only dealt with brick and mortar businesses price gouging medical necessity and other items during like a fire or COVID or any other situation. But all of these pop-up businesses online could price gouge, to their heart's desire, and big ones, and nothing could happen because the law did not cover the online businesses. It's a shift in thinking for whatever reason, and I know Neil can describe this. It's like beating our head against the wall when it comes to online platforms. One is because they're very lucrative. Two, it's because it sort of feels like you're interfering with First Amendment rights when there's absolutely no difference. It's just another place to do business. It's not a physical place, but it is the same impact. So we need the public to shift. We had this fight with human trafficking where they're selling kids online for sex, and it took like tremendous effort to explain that just because you're an online platform, you don't get to advertise a child. It's still a crime. And we have to do that shift with this organized retail theft. That's the place I think we want to start first. Neil, I don't know, you probably have more information.
No, I think that's exactly right. If you think about to draw the comparison a little further between brick and mortar and online, if I were going to open a business there in San Diego and I wanted to get a business permit, I'd go down and I'd have to file a permit, and they would want me to demonstrate that I'm Neil Bradley. You probably want to see a government issued photo ID, and you would collect contact information. You would know where I'm physically located. You would know a phone number or an email address to reach me. That's exactly what we're talking about for people who are selling larger volumes of goods online. To be clear, we're not talking about someone who has something sitting in their garage that you decided that you want to sell it online, and you go one of the platform sites and you're selling one thing or you're selling two things. We're talking about people who are selling large volumes, multiple transactions that are engaged in a business. And unfortunately, their business is selling stolen goods. And so we can cut that off at the beginning if we require just some of that basic information that's going to deter criminals from using these online sites. And so I don't think we should really be reliant on you and I as consumers to have to figure out and police this when we're online and shopping. I think we can do it kind of on the front end ahead of that by cutting off these as venues to offload stolen goods.
Great, thank you both. This next question is an industry question for Danielle and Neil. For the industry folks here that are looking to try to move the needle on this issue and meet with elected officials, they're talking about sometimes they're having a lack of data illustrating the size of the problem. Is there anywhere that you could point them to provide some good data that will help them counter the narrative?
So I'll offer the uschamber.com. If you go to uschamber.com, or you can simply Google it and organized retail theft. We actually have a landing page with links to the recommendations that we've made on the public policy side. That have links to some of the data. By the way, I think I misspoke when I said 300 and 350,000 to 700,000. That would be 100% increase. So if anyone's using that, understand that it's a 50% increase to 700,000. Unfortunately, I was trying to do math too quickly in my head, but just go to uschamber.com and you can find all of those data sources that you can pull down.
Thank you, Neil. So this is a two-part question for the district attorney. How how big of an issue is this in San Diego? What is the main difference between what is happening in San Diego and other cities with higher rates of organized retail theft? And what happens when a crew does this in multiple jurisdictions?
So we know that there is an increase in theft activity, but it is not well documented because a lot of the theft activity that's a misdemeanor under $950 was not booked in the last 2 years during COVID because misdemeanors that were not violent, like domestic violence or sex crimes, were not being booked in jail. And that is our primary source of tracking numbers. But we do know that the activity of organized retail theft, we know this best through our ORCA, our Organized Retail Crime Alliance in San Diego, and tracking of numbers and activities that has gone up. And we know that since 2019 that we've prosecuted close to 100 cases. And like I mentioned, gotten about 68 convictions. Others are making their way through, or they're in the wind and there are arrest warrants out for them. How does San Diego sit in terms of the rest of the regions? From my position as vice president of the National DAs Association, we are at the forefront of fighting this. We have dedicated resources to it because we know what the impact is on the community. We're active members of ORCA. We have an assigned expert prosecutor and a WIN, an investigator with experience to put these cases together. And we have put multiple really complex cases together, including that $700,000 case that I mentioned. And we've seen that the activity has started to come down in this regard. We know that accountability matters. We're using another system, a code section that helps us, a different section, but it's a roundabout way, not as direct. It gives us some more fights that we have to have in a courtroom when we have cross-jurisdictional cases. And that's why we want the law to be reactivated that allows us to handle a certain organized crime crew across the state, to be able to handle it in one court, in one place, without witnesses having to testify multiple times in different locations. So this is a high priority issue, but it's an issue that we're just beginning since May 15, since the bail, zero bail has gone away, to retrack, to get actual numbers as to how high is this activity.
Thank you, Summer. So real quick, Neil, what is the cost of that is passed on to the consumers because of the size of these stolen goods? How does that affect us as consumers?
Well, we all pay higher prices. So when businesses lose inventory because of retail theft, that inventory to them wasn't cost-free. Even if they have insurance, even if they're recouping some of that loss, they had to pay for that insurance, and insurance rates go up because of increased theft. And so all of us law-abiding consumers end up paying more. I don't have the numbers in front of me at the moment, but one of the things that we did to try to get a handle on this is we actually looked at earnings reports for publicly traded major retailers. And one of the things you started seeing happening over the last couple of years is CEOs reporting that increased theft was both reducing the profitability of the business, which means that less profitability means less money for employees, less money for shareholders, and causing them to raise prices. And so those two things going on, well, I can't give you a precise dollar amount. Understand that it's not a cost-free crime, and the people who ultimately pay the costs are employees, business owners, and consumers.
And to add to that, Cameron, what different retailers tell us is that They're also paying a higher cost by having to lock up many of the popular items. If you go to a store, you see, you know, deodorant and perfume and other items that are a high theft item being locked up. So that's an employee having to go up. That also reduces their profit to open that case in order to get that item. That is all due to theft and criminal activity, which is really a terrible thing. But one of the data points that came out of a nationwide snapshot that the National Retail Federation did regarding organized crime, and is really especially disturbing to me, is that 65% of retailers felt that there was an increase in violence, meaning the people that were stealing from them had weapons, didn't care about inflicting harm, that it was a more violent activity, and that was scaring them. And that really, in addition to the economic cost, that was the feeling. And 69% felt that it definitely increased over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Summer and Neil. So we have two last questions we could get through real quick with the time we have. One of them is, what is the estimated percentage of the stolen goods that are being sold through these online platforms, e-commerce platforms?
It's a good question. I couldn't give you percentages of where kind of the goods end up. I mean, we do know that a large number of these stolen goods are ultimately being sold on online platforms, and that has become kind of a principal venue for these criminal crime rings to offload stolen goods.
Thank you.
And that's our sense. That's our sense also, that it is, because we're seeing less, especially over the last couple of years, less swap meets, less of the other venues, because we didn't have as many, you know, public activities. So the sense definitely is, and that's why we need this law and the tools, because if we don't know the identity or anything else of these major resellers, we can't do search warrants, we can't investigate, we can't do surveillance to see how are they going to get their goods. So it is an imperative law enforcement tool for us.
Thank you. Will there be an increase in law enforcement officers to help combat this issue locally?
That's definitely the hope for us. We are seeing you know, cities invest more. It's very encouraging in officers, but we've also had a few post or police academies, you know, not go forward and shut down. So it's playing catch up in terms of getting officers in the pipeline. But in addition, having cities and counties invest in law enforcement, because if you don't invest in law enforcement and prosecutors, then, you know, there really isn't a way to shut it down. You have to invest, otherwise you can't do sophisticated investigations. And that's what these cases require, because these are sophisticated operations that require a lot of resources.
Thank you. And our last question here is, all of you from your different perspectives, how can everybody help? You know, we have the business community here, we have community members, we have retailers. What can everybody do to help fight this cause with you all?
Well, I'll just offer, do what you're doing right now, get informed and then advocate. And so once you know the facts, reach out to your members of Congress, ask them to help us close these online marketplaces as a way for people to offload these goods. Contact your state legislature, say it's time to do something about these laws and get them fixed. And then support great local prosecutors who are doing the hard work of bringing these people to justice. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining today and taking the time to become informed and ask you to please now be an advocate.
And I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and I'd like to thank all of our viewers who have participated with the Q&A. We hope that you will become more involved. And I can tell you legislators do listen if you can get a lot of people send in letters or emails or talking to them at forums. And I think that we really need to focus on this in a way that we haven't in the past. So Summer and Neil and Danielle, thank you very much for taking time for today's conversation. And thanks for sharing your insights and some just practical things we can do. And with that, we'll close out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.